Janet was frozen in place. She recognized that face. She'd seen that man. She'd seen him in a show recently, a matinee performance with some of her friends. It had been a great afternoon, and she recalled it well. Now, a new memory would be forever etched in her mind. Gone, the laughter and stories shared over wine and prosciutto. Now all she could think of was those little boys. McConnell was still watching as the images continued to move forward in time. We need more. We need the face of the victim. We need the murder scene. DA's not going to buy any of this. Everyone's gaze was now glued to the window, except Farley. Afraid he would miss a timestamp mark, his finger hovered over the mouse, ready for the next barked command from Lucero. His mind noted the bodies thrashing in a bed of blue sheets only peripherally. When the scene went dark, the room was silent. McConnell's labored breathing was the only sound. Well, hell, he muttered. That guy needs to go down. Now. But I can't ask the DA to issue an arrest warrant on the basis of this. No judge is going to buy it either. We need more. We need hard evidence, physical evidence. We need someone to go out and talk to this guy. Lucero looked at Farley, who only groaned. Of course, I'll go. Take a patrol unit and another uniform with you. What, you think a pansy who abuses little kids is going to be a threat to me? Farley bristled with indignation. Regardless, Lucero said, get going. Take a statement. Look at his car. Nose around the perimeter a bit. See if he looks nervous about anything. Find out what his morning schedule was for the past few days. Those bodies aren't just appearing in the quarry. If he's dropping them, there's a way to track that. Go check it out. Be back by 1 o'clock. I want to review this video with the DA. He's got to see what we're looking at here. Maybe he can come up with something. I don't know. Farley just sighed and left the room. Lucero glanced at Janet. We should do another session with a specimen from the latest victim, as soon as possible. How long would that take to prep? Janet chewed her lip, considering. I could have another sample ready in 10 minutes, Detective? Make it 5, McConnell added. Janet glanced at the chief and then the detective, who simply nodded. She tried not to sigh herself and said only, I'll get it right away, sirs. I'll have to go in and get the slides. Charlie was already out the door. A Tale of Two Gardeners. The gardeners weren't regularly scheduled to come in today, but their boss had scheduled them to go in and clean up any damage and debris after the storm for this special client. They were familiar with El Profesor's whims and demands by now, so they didn't even bother announcing their arrival to anyone but their boss by text. The garden didn't appear to be in that bad a shape, but there was plenty of wind-tossed twigs, small branches, and accumulated leaves to deal with. They headed to the shed next to the house to get some rakes and trash bins, which was how they discovered El Profesor. The mudroom door was wide open, and they could clearly see him huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth and muttering to himself. They glanced at each other in alarm. What were they supposed to do now? El Profesor? Está bien? The moaning got a little louder, the rocking a little faster, but there was no other response. The gardeners both backed away together in unspoken agreement. This was way beyond anything they knew how to deal with. A call to the boss would have to be made, which meant going back out to the truck to radio in. They just made their way to the gate when it banged open from the other side, a uniformed police officer with hand raised towards them, causing them instant panic. Neither of them had anything like legal documentation on them. Were they being deported? Tomate, the officer said, leading them back. Where's El Dueño? Where's the owner of the house? The two men looked at each other in a brief silent discussion. If they were helpful, the police might not ask them for ID. Otherwise, two heads nodded imperceptibly at each other before they both turned in unison and pointed to the mudroom door. Está aquí, one man said, the other nodding mutely. The officer raised his radio and barked something unintelligible into it, watching as a moment later a second police officer came around to the gate. This did not put the gardeners at ease. Farley and Espinosa had just arrived at the estate. They were less than impressed with the opulence and grandeur. They'd had enough experience with people to know that all that glitters is not, in fact, gold. Farley thought it was an extravagant waste of money personally, and that it might be an attempt at compensation for what might be a lack, as he put it, of other areas of more manly persuasion. Having banged loudly on the front door several times, announcing their presence without getting an answer, Farley had Espinosa watch the front entrance and garage doors, all three of them, while he tried around the back. He could just see two heads over the fence heading towards him as he approached the back gate. 2 sentences in, and he had identified them as illegals. They wouldn't meet his gaze or even look at him, as he tried to elicit some kind of information with his scanty knowledge of Spanish, not even bothering trying to explain that he could care less what status their immigration was and that he had nothing to do with customs. He finally understood that the suspect was inside the mudroom. Radioing Espinosa to join him, both officers made their way through the garden to the back of the house. Farley could hear the moaning before he could see anything inside. He glanced at Espinosa, who just shrugged. Stepping carefully inside the utility room, Farley squatted down so that he was on a level with the man crouched on the floor, moaning and muttering to himself as he rocked back and forth. Mr. Conti? Mr. Antonio Conti? The moaning got louder and the shape pulled in on itself, becoming an even smaller and tighter ball. Farley and Espinosa shared a look. It was obvious their suspect, if this was actually their suspect, was not able to be interviewed as he was currently. What do you think? Some kind of nervous breakdown? Farley's tone said clearly he didn't believe it. He's obviously in some kind of distress. Reminds me of my little brother, like when he'd have an episode. He's autistic. Something completely harmless would set him off and he'd be under the bed or a chair doing that. This guy ain't autistic. He's an opera singer, a performer. This could all be just some act for all we know. I can't tell what he's saying. Sounds like... Espinosa leaned closer. Like, beloved? My beloveds? Farley stood up and motioned Espinosa to back out the yard once more. Call for backup and EMTs. He needs to be seen by a doctor. Farley nodded towards the house. On it, called Espinosa, already halfway to the gate at a trot. Farley sighed and looked at the gardeners, who stood at a distance from him, obviously torn between the need to get out of there and their curiosity to find out what was going to happen next. He needed to get statements from them before he could turn them loose. Waving them over to him, he sat down on the bench seat where boots were neatly arranged and pulled out his notebook and pen. You speak English? I need you to tell me what you know about Mr. Conti here. What did you call him? The professor? The 2 gardeners were still obviously reluctant to come any closer, but one approached halfway. Si, I speak little English. You work for Mr. Conti? El profesor? Si, trabajo de jardín? Farley knew enough Spanish to recognize work and garden. Fine. Ever seen him like this before? This happen often? Him moaning and rocking like that? Farley tried to imitate the sounds and motions while waving at the house. No, nunca. No, never, repeated Farley, making notes. How long have you been doing the garden? ¿Cuánto tiempo de jardín? 2 años? The gardeners looked at each other and shrugged. 2 years, muttered Farley, making more notes as he assessed the huddled form, quieter now that no one else was in the mudroom. Anything unusual you see around here? Anything you were supposed to stay away from? Leave alone? The gardeners both looked at him in confusion. Their combined English skills were obviously not up to these questions. 4 minutes ETA on the bus, Espinosa reported as he joined Farley. You speak English? Yeah, some. Why? You got some questions for these gentlemen? Espinosa's disdain was evident. Farley frowned at him. We don't want to spook these gentlemen, if you know what I mean. Right now, they're our best source of info here, our only source right now. Ask them if they've ever seen anything unusual around here, or we're told to leave something alone. Espinosa rattled off a series of questions at the gardeners in Spanish. After a brief exchange between the officer and the gardeners, he turned back to the Farley with raised eyebrows. What? What'd they say? Farley tried to keep his voice level. He has roses. No one is allowed to touch them or go anywhere near them. He calls them his beloveds, with a capital B. They're on the other side of that hedge there. Farley jumped up, adrenaline kicking in full force. Show me! He barked at the gardeners. They both stepped back fast, looking like they were ready to run for it. Sorry. Can you show me? La Rosas? He tried to smile reassuringly at them. One of the gardeners nodded reluctantly, and both gardeners started walking along a small gravel path towards the forsythia hedge. Farley motioned Espinosa to stay back and watch the house while he followed the two gardeners. Rounding the corner of the hedge, he could count a line of 10 rose bushes and stopped where he was, noticing a pile of hand tools scattered at the nearer end. He bent down to look at them more closely without touching them and saw a cell phone laying in the grass. It was evident someone had been working in the garden around there, maybe cleaning up storm debris, but had left abruptly, leaving their tools and phone behind. "Stay back," Farley waved at the gardeners behind him as he backed out as well. Forensics and the chief would have his ass if he contaminated a potential crime scene. He hurried back to where Espinosa was impatiently waiting, his head swiveling from the mudroom to the hedge and back again.